Hello everybody, this is Bird Brain, where here we are nerdy for the birdies. I apologize for this video taking a while, but today we're going to break down not just the 53-man roster, but the 70-man roster of the Philadelphia Eagles 2025 team. A couple of days before kickoff. Reason why I took a while with this video is I don't like to review the initial 53-man roster because it usually changes pretty quick, and we've seen a lot of changes, and I was kind of waiting for the changes to calm down before I make my final video, and they kind of have a little bit, so we'll see what happens. Anyways, let's not waste any time. We're going to go through position by position and break down all the players who should contribute in some way, shape, or form to the 2025 Philadelphia Eagles. And we start with the most important position, the quarterback position, where we have 3 on the active roster and 1 on the practice squad. We have Jalen Hurts, Tanner McKee, and a newcomer, Sam Howell. Along with on the practice squad, Kyle McCord. Don't have a ton to say about Jalen Hurts and Tanner McKee. Obviously, that's your starter and backup right there. Pretty straightforward. Sam Howell is a very interesting acquisition, and I'm going to talk about Howell and McCord at the same time here because they kind of relate to each other. You know, when it came to over the summer, watching QB3, it felt like the QB3 for the Eagles really just wasn't a secure guy. You felt a little better about McCord because he was developmental, but at the same time, especially now with Tanner McKee's injury, you don't feel super great about Kyle McCord having to be the one to carry the roster if that finger injury for Tanner's lingering, if something happens to Jalen as well. So, we saw last year QB3 was deployed. You know, Tanner McKee played in games. This year, hopefully that doesn't happen, but if it does happen, I feel a little better about a Sam Howell, who has played in this league. He has started. Obviously, Eagles fans are familiar with him with his time with Washington and some of the battles they had against him. The thing about Sam Howell is like, if you can keep him clean and whatnot and get him in rhythm, he can be a pretty dangerous quarterback in terms of just picking teams apart. But if he gets pressured, he takes a lot of sacks, he'll throw a lot of picks, but he's a good quarterback 3. You know, someone who can just sit behind the others. Hopefully he doesn't have to play this year, but if he does, he at least has experience, unlike McCord, who just felt very shaky. So him being on the practice squad is really good for his development. Now we move on to running back. We're on the active roster. The Eagles kept 3 running backs. You have Saquon Barkley, Shipley, and A.J. Dillon. Then you also have Ben Van Simmeren as a fullback. And on the practice squad, another newcomer, Audric Estime. So, talking about the running back room here, obviously Saquon's your starter. Shipley's a good number 2 to Saquon. And I like having A.J. Dillon here, who I think is a good number 3. He's that Jordan Howard style of power back, and he can catch out of the backfield, he can pass protect, so I definitely think he'll have a role on game day. And my honest opinion is, if Saquon went down, I'd feel a lot better about A.J. Dillon starting than a Will Shipley. The thing about Will Shipley is that if you can give him the lanes to run, he can burst through and make big plays. The problem is that if you can't create those lanes for him, he doesn't really... He can't really create for himself. Another thing I noticed is that he's not very well balanced. The slightest bit of contact will cause him to, tip over and lose kind of his, momentum, lose his, his speed. So it's interesting there. It kind of reminds me of Zach Ertz in a way, where Zach Ertz would oftentimes catch a pass and then he'd get bumped a little bit and then he'd just go tumbling on the ground. Ben Van Simmeren is a fullback. He's a... I say this jokingly, but he's essentially this team's Travis Hunter. You know, he's going to play special team snaps. He might get snaps in a pinch at linebacker if there was ever a dire situation, because that's his old position. But for the most part, he's going to be this team's fullback. How many snaps a game will he get? I don't know, but he was good at it last year. I'm curious to see what other roles they deploy him in as the fullback. If he gets target opportunities, carry opportunities, will be interesting. And then you have Audric Estime on the practice squad, who was the draft pick of the Broncos a year ago. I like Estime as a player here, and I think that your kind of goal with him is he stays on the practice squad this year. If there are injuries, he gets elevated. And then the big thing with him is if at the end of the season he's still around, he could then compete for that RB3 job, assuming A.J. Dillon moves on to other pastures after this season. Next we go to wide receiver, which has 5 on the active roster, 4 potentially on the practice squad, and another to talk about as well. On the active roster, you have A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Jahan Dotson, Darius Cooper, and John Mechie. On the practice squad, Elijah Cooks, Terrace Marshall, Britton Covey is back, and we also potentially have Javon Baker. I'll get to that in a minute. And then on IR, of course, Johnny Wilson. In terms of the active roster, obviously we know A.J. Brown, we know Devontae Smith. These guys are great players. Jahan Dotson's obviously your number 3. I'm curious to see what Darius Cooper's role is going to be for this team, because he had a really solid preseason. He earned his way onto this roster. I think he'll be doing a little bit on special teams. I think he'll be doing a little bit as a backup receiver, maybe in that Paris Campbell, Zach Pascal kind of role. You've got John Mechie also in that kind of dirty work receiver role because of the injury to Johnny Wilson, who will be out for the entire season. You have on practice squad Elijah Cooks, I think is a good developmental piece for receiver. It sounded like early on in camp he was starting to emerge as someone who could potentially make the team. He didn't because of injuries, but he's still around, so we'll see. Terrace Marshall was on the practice squad, then he was cut, then he's brought back, so looks like he's going to stick around. Britton Covey's back, which is really nice. He's going to be the team's punt returner, I expect. He's going to get elevated on game day and eventually be added to the active roster. And then you have Javon Baker, who was the 4th round pick of the Patriots. I think he hasn't technically signed here yet, but it's been with an intent to sign. And I think the reason why he's not formally signed to the practice squad is because the Eagles like to do this thing where they have a flowing practice squad of players where they kind of will cut guys and bring other guys back every week. So it's like they have a practice squad of like 20 players, but they keep cutting and adding guys back and forth. It's a little bit of a wonky thing to do, but it's their thing. And obviously I mentioned Johnny Wilson is on IR for his knee and ankle injury. Now we are on tight end, where we have Dallas Goedert, Grant Calcaterra, and Kylan Granson on the active roster. And then on practice squad, you have E.J. Jenkins and Cameron Latu. The interesting thing about this position is the idea of keeping both Granson and Calcaterra, who I think are personally fairly similar players. And I wonder if this has to do with the Johnny Wilson injury, missing like another big body red zone target. My guess is that's why you keep Granson, who can do some of the same things in that category that Johnny Wilson used to do. Both aren't great blockers, so if Dallas Goedert gets hurt, which is a yearly occurrence, you do worry about the blocking tight end aspect of this team. But for the most part, this is a pretty solid room, and obviously E.J. Jenkins and Cameron Latu will get called up if they absolutely are needed on a game day. I don't expect that to happen anytime soon, but we'll see. And then the group with probably the most movement within the last few days, you have the offensive line room, which consists of the starters Jordan Mailata, Landon Dickerson, Cam Jurgens, Tyler Steen, Lane Johnson, and then backups Fred Johnson, Brett Toth, Drew Kendall, Matt Pryor, Cameron Williams, and Kenyon Green was just recently elevated back up to the active roster. Then you have on practice squad Holland Pierce and Felix, I can't say his last name, but our international pathway player that the Eagles added to replace Laken Vakalehi. And then on IR you have rookies Miles Hinton and Willie Lampkin, who they acquired from the Rams. So a lot to talk about here. Obviously with the active roster to start, Tyler Steen clearly winning that right guard job. A big thing with the offensive line depth was a question going into the 53-man roster cutdown, and they made some moves. They brought back Fred Johnson, who's a fan favorite. People love him for his segments on the mic, and he actually played pretty well last year too in spots when he had to come in, especially against the Bengals. Obviously they traded away Darian Kennard. Kenyon Green was someone we were worried, would he be on the team, would he not? And looks like he in some way, shape, or form made it. They really leaned with the youth here with Kendall and Williams making the team and Hinton on, the short-term IR list. So we'll see what happens with him. Willie Lampkin as an acquisition is very interesting because he's a lineman that's basically my height, just heavier. But you don't see guys that size playing offensive line, but he's actually pretty good at it, and I'm curious about his role. And one of the ideas for him mentioned I've heard is fullback, and I could see that as like a Patrick Ricard type of fullback or a Scott Matlock type of fullback for this team. And then we go to defensive tackle, probably the most straightforward room on the team. You have Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, Mora Hojimo, Ty Robinson, Gabe Hall, and Byron Young. And I think this makes sense. This was a group that, I wasn't sure if they'd keep 5 or 6. They kept 6. This was a really good group during the preseason. A lot of expectation for Jalen Carter to take another step, Jordan Davis to take another step, Mora Hojimo to take a huge step in his career. And I think Ty Robinson, Gabe Hall, and Byron Young will be solid depth piece additions for this team. And yeah, that's pretty much all there is to say. It's a pretty straightforward group. We move on to edge, where here we have on the active roster Nolan Smith, Jalix Hunt, Azeez Ojolari, Josh Uche, and Agbo Okoronkwo. On the practice squad, we have Patrick Johnson and Antoine Powell-Ryland. So this is definitely one of the weaker edge groups, in my opinion, that the Eagles have had in recent years. But it's not weak because they have bad players. It's just more so unproven players. And I'm curious to see how it's going to play out in the regular season. I have a lot of expectations for Nolan Smith and Jalix Hunt. And I'm curious to see if the depth guys will find ways to contribute. Obviously on practice squad, Patrick Johnson's been the preseason hero for this team. He constantly makes plays. Antoine Powell-Ryland had a very quiet camp, and I was worried about him getting cut. He had a very productive college season last year. And then in the final game, he has that big strip sack, and it maybe was enough to keep him around. He flashed maybe just enough, and now he's on the practice squad, and he'll probably develop and likely make the team next year if he sticks around. Moving on to linebacker, where we have Zach Bond, Jahad Campbell, Jeremiah Trotter Jr., and Smile Mondin Jr. On the practice squad, you have Chance Campbell, and on the PUP list, you have Nakobe Dean, which we expected Nakobe to be on PUP. He's coming back from a patellar tendon injury. It's a very tough injury to come back from, so we wish him well. We'll see when he plays. The earliest he can come back is week 5. We'll see if it is week 5. In terms of the active roster, this is a really good group of linebackers, and we saw it throughout the preseason. I just think Bond and Campbell might end up being one of the best linebacker duos in the NFL this year. I just think they're going to be so disruptive. And Trotter in his own right has had a really good summer for this team. He's really challenged Campbell. I wouldn't be surprised if he even mixed in some snaps in week 1 as a starter. And Smile Mondin had his moments throughout the preseason as well. I think he'll be really good on special teams. Chance Campbell, I don't have a lot to say about him because he was a very late add-on in camp, but the fact that he made the practice squad, being this late add-on linebacker, is fascinating to me. It shows me he really showed a lot to this team for him to just make it that late on, so I think that's interesting he's on the team. Moving on. We move to corner, where on the active roster we have Quinyon Mitchell, Adoree Jackson, Cooper DeJean, Jacorian Bennett, Keely Ringo, and Mac McWilliams. And then on the practice squad, you have Brandon Johnson, Perry Nickerson, and a newcomer, Ambry Thomas. So, starting off here with corner, the big question on everyone's minds, and we're still nervous about it, is CB2. Who's going to play CB2 for this team? And it's pretty much been all but confirmed to be Adoree Jackson, and a lot of people are pretty upset about that. And I'm going to give my devil's advocate take about it. I think the reason why Adoree Jackson won the job is because he has the highest floor compared to the other corners. Starting off with Mac McWilliams, he's a rookie, so there's a lot of uncertainty there. He's got a lot to learn still. With Keely, the technique just isn't there. We saw it throughout the preseason. We saw it throughout camp. It's just a little too erratic right now, and I think he's got to learn to refine himself more. We hoped he would have, but clearly that has not happened yet. So then it comes down to Jacorian Bennett and Adoree Jackson in terms of the highest floor. And I think that Jackson's been here all summer. Ja'Cory Bennett's only been here a few weeks, so he's still learning the defense. I wouldn't be shocked, and it's even been said today by Vic that Adoree could, or Ja'Cory Bennett could very easily get snaps this year. I think he will. But right now, against the Dallas Cowboys, if you're asking me who's the best CB2, I would say it's Adoree, just because I think he's the safest guy to put out there. Again, I think the ceiling is low, right? But in terms of winning this game, I've seen people compare this to 2023. The big problem with 2023 is that secondary was a very old, slow secondary. I mean, you had a 30-plus-year-old Darius Slay, 30-year-old James Bradbury, 30-plus-year-old Kevin Byard, 30-plus-year-old Bradley Roby, all taking pivotal snaps throughout the season. You know, you had a very, very young Eli Ricks playing important snaps, and that was a huge struggle. You had Levante Maddox playing snaps, and he got hurt, and he was just so inconsistent. So it just felt like that secondary was just either very old and very young in both the wrong ways. And I think that's why they struggled so much. I don't feel like that. I feel very comfortable with Quinyon Mitchell. I feel very comfortable with Cooper DeJean and Reed Blankenship, and even the safeties as a whole. We'll talk about them later. If CB2 is really the only weakness, even if Adoree gives up 5 for 80 and 2 touchdowns week 1, I don't think that's going to, kill this team. Overall, I think this team has enough good going for it. Again, they're really good up front on the line. They're really good at linebacker. They've got good safeties. I think, if CB2 is their only issue, I think it's kind of like a first world issue type of thing. I think this roster is too good to let CB2 completely wreck it. And obviously, Ambry Thomas joining this team. I don't have a lot to say about him. The most I remember about him is he had the game-winning pick for the 49ers against the Rams in the end of the season game that helped them get into the playoffs in 2021. So it'll be an interesting practice squad. I have to see the depth and see what he can do for this team. And then we move to this safety group where the Eagles have on the active roster Reed Blankenship, Sidney Brown, and Andrew Makuba. On the practice squad, they have Marcus Epps and Andre Sam. And then on IR, they have Lewis Seen. Safety's been another group that people have wondered about this summer. I really liked the performance from Andrew Makuba, and it seems like the team really liked it as well. I wouldn't be surprised if he starts week 1 if he's healthy. I think he could be explosive. I can kind of see in the ways that a lot of people said he'll be like CJ for this team, so I'm very curious to see what that looks like. Reed, as always, is a consummate professional. He's good. It sounds like he might even get extended in the next few days, and I feel like I'm a little higher on Sidney Brown than everybody else is. I think he's a solid enough starter at safety that, again, even if Makuba's not ready to go, I think you'll be okay with Sidney at safety. He's going to make mistakes, right? But again, Sidney's not going to get better unless you give him reps. So I wouldn't be shocked if it happens. On practice squad, bringing back Marcus Epps makes total sense. If Makuba is not healthy or struggling and Sidney struggles, then you have someone that has a pretty good floor who can start in their place. Lewis Seen, maybe just found a way to get him around the team a little bit longer. So then now he's on the Eagles IR, so maybe he has a chance next summer to try to make a push. We'll see about that. And then on special teams, we have Jake Elliott, Brady Mann, Charlie Hewlett. Nothing else really to say there. So that is the roster as a whole. The big thing for me, and I try to make sure I explain, I really want to be sure to explain this very clearly. There are some areas of the roster that obviously are better than others, but I don't think this is a bad team, and I think we have to continuously look at the team as a whole rather than look at the micro. You're not going to have elite positions on every single spot of the team, but you have really good players at every position, though. And what I mean by that is, you may not have an elite CB2, but you have a really good CB1. You have a great quarterback, an exceptional running back, 2 really, really good receivers, 2 great receivers, honestly, a really good tight end, an awesome offensive line. You have an absolute freak of nature at D tackle. You have some really good edge rushers. really good linebacker duo. You've got a great outside corner and a great slot corner, and you've got a really good safety. You've got every area of the field covered. So yes, there are going to be some spots that aren't perfect, but I think the areas of strength will help mask those deficiencies. It's just not possible to field a perfect team. I keep seeing people say, like, you gotta trade this, do that, and that. It's just not going to happen. We live in a salary cap era. It's just not going to work. You know, there's just so many limitations. You have to rely on the young guys. Put some faith in the young guys to work. And it means, yes, they're going to go through some growing pains, but you got to be patient. It's a long season. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. We'll see what happens. I see people worrying about dynasty. Like, let's worry about beating the Cowboys. We can worry about dynasty in the future. Anyways, this is Bird Brain. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Fly, Eagles, fly. Oh, one last thing. I will be in attendance at the Eagles-Cowboys game on Thursday, so I won't be able to do a post-game ponder until probably Friday. We'll see how early I can do that, so it might be like a day or so after the game, because probably take me a while to get home and we'll be able to talk about it. But yeah, anyway, this is Bird Brain. Hope you guys enjoyed being nerdy today. Fly, Eagles, fly. See you around.